Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Dougal, and to Jose for that very kind introduction. I'd forgotten some of the things that Dougal referred to there. Having been around this subject for a long time, one tends to forget some of the involvement one's had. I'm extremely honoured and privileged to be giving this inaugural Philip Thomas lecture. Philip is somebody I've known for over 35 years. He was on my interview board when I joined the Fire Research Station. For those of you who don't know, the younger folk here, the Fire Research Station was a government laboratory which was privatised in 1997. But when I joined it, it was a government laboratory. And Philip was a key figure as he remained, and he interviewed me at that time. And in fact, I must say that most of what I know about fire science, and indeed some of the more philosophical issues associated with the delivery of fire safety, I've learned from Philip, quite often over a glass of whiskey. And I echo what Jose said about how some of these papers are very, very difficult to follow. But if you get him talking to you about them over a glass of whiskey, you usually make a lot of progress. Right, so, you know, there's that famous quotation, isn't there, due to Isaac Newton, that if he'd seen further than others, it was because he stood on the shoulders of giants. I think it's true of all of us that have followed Philip in this particular field of fire safety science, that we've kind of been standing on his shoulders. He's done so much in so many different fields. He's contributed to many seminal research in many areas that we're heavily dependent on his work, and particularly those that are applying some of the formulae in fire safety engineering. Whether we've seen as far as he did remains to be seen, perhaps. But it wasn't only his seminal scientific work, he also had enormous vision and leadership. As Dougal pointed out, he was coordinator of CIB W14. For those of you not familiar with this is the International Building Council, and was responsible really for international cooperative, what you'd call pre-normative research today. And so he was coordinator, which is effectively the chairman of that particular committee, at the same time as he was chairman of ISO TC92, the International Standards Committee responsible for fire standards. And also he was the inaugural chair of the International Association for Fire Safety Science. So the objective there was to try and bring all the different elements of that go to contribute to fire safety science, bring them together, hopefully bring them all to the same level of standard, ensure that the work was peer reviewed, so that it raised the level of the quality of the research that was available, for that then to be applied as an engineering discipline. His contributions, seminal research, can be listed in these topics, and I haven't really got time to go through all of them, but there are so many topics that he worked on. In fact, my talk today, I'm not going to be as objective as I normally am in a talk. I'm going to be subjective, and in fact, I'm going to take you through one particular area that Philip developed, and where it impinged on work I did, and then go on to the modelling which followed from it. But Philip has done a lot of work, particularly on enclosure fire dynamics, air entrainment, the process of flashover, the very complicated instabilities, jumps and falls that you get that cause flashover. And as Jose said, the outcome of what he did was always to come up with some equations, which hopefully you can use. Sometimes they're very, very complicated and very difficult to follow. And indeed, Philip and I and my colleague Suresh Kumar, who's at the Building Research Establishment, we had a paper in a conference a couple of months ago that co-authored with Philip. Very, very complicated mathematical approach to solving the spill plume problem that Jose referred to. Sometimes very, very difficult to follow exactly what's in there, but if you can get to the end point, it's extremely valuable and always provides practical utility to his work. Now, again, for the younger folk who are here who are not perhaps familiar with his work, there is a book, a collected series of papers of his. In fact, the papers were selected by him. So he's written well over 100 papers, but I suppose there's 30 in this book, maybe a bit more than that. But for those of you that are not familiar with his work, I do suggest that you look at this, because it covers those fields that I've just referred to. And you will see the vision, technical vision that Jose referred to in these publications. There was another collected series of his fire research notes, but this has a very short print run, and it would be difficult for you to find, I think. But the IFSS is putting onto the web all the fire research notes that were produced during the period, which I've written down here, 1952 to, sorry, it's a long time ago, but there's good stuff in there. 1952 to, I can't remember them. Doesn't matter, but they'll all be on the internet, and they include all of Philip's fire research notes, and indeed those of his contemporaries. I haven't written down the date that they were up to, but it was before 1986. So, to be quite honest, I didn't quite know what to talk about here today, because as has been pointed out, I retired 5 years ago. I've been doing a little bit of work, but I've not been quite as vigorous as I used to be. But I thought it might be interesting just to see the evolution of one particular area of our subject, which is extremely important, and how the science has developed from simply an observational science to an analytical science, and then on to a challenge really for computer simulation. And that's the buoyant diffusion of flame. So I've used this old photograph here. I'm sorry if I keep dwelling on the past, but Philip obviously plays a big part in what I have to say here, so a lot of this work was done a long time ago. This actually is Professor Rasbach on the right-hand side, who you can see partly obscured by this apparatus. And these are experiments being done in the late 1950s. And it's that flame problem. How do you characterise flames like this, which are obviously the essence of the fire safety issue that I want to discuss today. Now, there have been a lot of experimental work initially done in Russia. Some excellent work by Blinov and Kuzyarkov, for those of you that know the paper, measuring flame heights and the rate of fuel mass loss in the 1950s. And this had been interpreted by some that used the explanation that the flame height was controlled by the initial momentum at the fuel to describe flame height. And this is where Philip looked at this problem. And so what we're looking at here is flame length over diameter, which is on the right-hand side there, against the pan diameter. I won't go into the details of all the different regimes you see here, but simply this is a plot after Hottle in 1958 of those experimental data. So this is purely observational work. Now, when Philip heard that it was proposed that